Hello, everyone. I'm Terence Kernaghan, your member of Provincial Parliament for London North Centre, and I'd like to thank you for joining me tonight for my Parent Roundtable. As the first day of school quickly approaches, I continue to receive letters, phone calls, and emails from parents, educators, and community members demanding more funding and resources to ensure that kids can return safely. The government has put parents in an incredibly difficult position. Students and parents with health risks have said they feel as though they have to stay home, and other parents feel pressured to send their kids back to school because of unavoidable work commitments. Some parents, mostly moms, have even said they feel pressure to drop out of work to help care for their kids. The government should not be forcing parents to make these difficult choices. As your MPP, I've asked the government to ditch this risky back to school scheme and instead issue emergency funding to ensure it's safe for kids to go back to school. That means increased funding to ensure our schools are safe, obtaining touch-free hand washing stations, water fountains, and school buses, and more funding for school buses so that kids can socially distance and get back to school safely without endangering others. But most importantly, we need this government to implement smaller, safer classes. As a former teacher myself, I was already concerned about large class sizes prior to the outbreak of COVID-19. This pandemic has made addressing large class sizes in our schools an even more urgent safety concern. We can no longer have 20, 25, or more than 30 kids cramped in a classroom, or even worse, a portable. Parents, teachers, education workers, and public health authorities have all called for smaller, safer classes in September, and I think it's time this government listened to them. But not only is this government refusing to fund smaller classes, we're actually seeing collapsed classrooms that make them even larger than before. That makes it impossible for kids, teachers, and education workers to physically distance in the classroom. And so today, I wanted to hear from some London parents and listen to their concerns about returning to school this month, as well as the need for safer classrooms. So I'd like to get things started with some brief introductions from our panelists. I'd love for you to introduce yourselves and tell us the names, ages, and grades of your little ones and what you're planning to do in the fall. So Sarah, would you please get us started today?
Sure. Okay, so I'm Sarah McNeil. I'm a parent living in your riding, Terence, and some riding. And I have a 4-year-old child. Her name is Kira. She was supposed to start junior kindergarten in September. And unfortunately, we made the decision to keep her home. We were lucky we were able to make that decision. As you mentioned, a lot of parents are not. So, but that might not last. It'll really depend on my husband's work. If they send him back in the new year, we may have to attempt to put her in anyway. She has some health concerns, so that was one of the reasons we kept her out. But yeah, so that's our story, so to speak.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Sarah. Next, we'll go to Jenna. Jenna, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your family's schooling situation?
Yeah, so my name is Jenna Rose Sams, and I live in Old East Village. And my daughter, Olive, is 7 years old, going into grade 2 at Lord Roberts French Immersion. This year, it was very difficult. My daughter is very social, loves her community. So the decision to not put her in physical schooling was not taken lightly. I am doing remote learning, but we are doing pod learning with some of her other classmates. So all of the moms are coming together to educate our children remotely, but also being able to have them socialize. So, yeah.
Well, thanks very much, Jenna. And finally, Chris, can you tell us a bit about your family?
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. My name's Chris, and I have 4 children re-entering school this fall. So a 15-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 9-year-old. So my 2 oldest sons, Harrison and Thompson, are going into secondary school in grade 10 and grade 9. And my two youngest, Max and Andy, are going into grade 5 and grade 4 in elementary school. So they'll all be attending a version of in-person learning. The two oldest ones are in the adaptive model, so they'll be there for a portion of their day, and then continuing that work at home. And the other one, the younger ones, are in elementary school, so they'll be there 5 days a week, full time.
My goodness, it would be difficult entering high school first year. Was it your son Thompson?
Mm-hmm.
Into grade 9? I mean, my goodness, sort of not having the graduation and then going into this brand new sphere. My goodness.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your introductions, everyone. And, when we take a look at it, there do seem to be some common threads here and also some common challenges, but also each of your stories are also unique. So Sarah, I know that you mentioned that your daughter has some health concerns to consider, and would you be able and willing to share those with us? And how are those impacting your decision to keep her home?
Well, yeah, she and I both have the same health issues. I was severely asthmatic as a child, and to the point where I was in and out of the hospital multiple times before the age of 7. I've got memories of, being wheeled in on a stretcher, having them cut off my clothes because they, needed to get to me immediately, being put in that little tent to get oxygen, that kind of thing. So thankfully, she's not quite as bad as I was, but she gets viral induced asthma and she gets pneumonia very easily. So prior to the age of 2, when we put her in daycare, she just got cold after cold, which is normal, but her colds turned into pneumonia, and she had it 5 times before the age of 2. Wow. And a couple of those times were ER visits, and one time in particular, the ER visit, I think she was about 14 months old. Her oxygen was low. They took us immediately, even though it was a packed waiting room, which is, good, but also not good. If you're getting bumped to the front of the line, that's not really a good sign health-wise. So, and then the next day I got a call from the ER doctor telling me that her x-ray had shown that her heart was larger than they'd liked. So there's nothing more terrifying than hearing a doctor say, there's a problem with your daughter's heart, and then having to go back and get tests run. And they basically concluded that it was tied to the pneumonia and that it would likely go back to normal as she recovered. And thankfully, that's what happened. But knowing what we know about COVID and how it attacks multiple systems, including the heart and the lungs and respiratory, this is terrifying on all kinds of levels. So, and she's not officially considered medically fragile, but she's more at risk than your normal 4-year-old would be, for sure.
No, absolutely. It's those are compelling reasons. I mean, my goodness, the air we breathe, what we require to maintain our systems, and you can't. It's a tremendous risk with the reality of COVID-19 to think of your daughter. But also, I wanted to ask, what are some of the things that the board and the government could do to alleviate your concerns for your concerns, and as well as other students who might have health risks?
I think the two major things that need to happen are class sizes being reduced. Absolutely, 100%. You can't, these kids, especially the youngest ones, they touch everything. They touch each other, they hug, they get close. That's just developmentally normal. So I think if you have less kids in a room, that automatically reduces that risk by 100. Like, they've done some modeling to show just how less likely it is that you'll see COVID outbreaks with smaller class sizes. So that's my number one thing that I want to see happen. But the other thing that I want to see happen is we need upgrades to these schools. So many of them don't have windows that open. They don't have, like the high school I went to was built in 1926. It's almost 100 years old. I went to, I attended Arthur Bowden Secondary School, which is where my nephew is opted out of this year. But like, that school is almost 100 years old. You're going to tell, it doesn't have air conditioning, much less proper ventilation. And there's so many other schools that are like that. Like, I've worked in schools, I teach at the high school level. I've worked in schools where we turn off the lights because that just makes it cooler, and that's what we have to do because we don't have the money to upgrade the system the way we need to upgrade it. And there's evidence now that shows that it's not just droplets, aerosols might be a factor. And if you're sitting there for, hours upon hours in the same air that everybody else is breathing, and especially the younger ones who aren't going to be great at wearing masks, like that's in my mind like a perfect storm for bad. So I think we need to see those upgrades done, and those upgrades need to have been started in March. Like, I don't know why they didn't start at least doing something then when they knew that this was going to go long term. And I believe they knew because, the writing was on the wall. Like, it just needs to be done. Those are the two things that I think are the most important, for sure.
That's right. We knew back in March that eventually school was going to come back, and we knew for certain that it would be returning in September. So it also speaks to the last government. They allowed $15.8 billion in school repair backlogs, and it has ballooned now to an estimated $16.3 billion. And it's a shame to see schools that are have taps that you can't drink from, leaky roofs. There's so many different things, and but you've also touched on the fact that we see all these little people. They haven't seen each other for, in some cases, months. Their first human instinct is going to be to want to hug one another, and it's going to be very difficult to try to train them not to be excited to see their friends, and the physical distancing is very much a consideration. So thank you very much, Sarah. And Jenna, I'd like to move on to you. And I'd like to ask, how has it been difficult juggling work from home while also having your child learn at home?
Olive splits her time, like primarily with me, but then also goes to her father's house. And she did not like the online learning at first. She's so social. It was also very rushed. I felt the interface wasn't very user-friendly. I talked a lot with her teacher and expressed some concerns. And Olive's father really wanted to do like regimented time on the tablet. And I was like, okay. But when she would come here, she'd be like, I've already done so much homework. I don't want to do more. So what we focused on, and after talking with her teacher, was her mental health. And when I realized that COVID was happening, she couldn't have her birthday party. In lieu of that, I bought a swing set. I was like, I don't know how long this is going to go on, but you need to be outside and playing. We started a garden. We went on a lot of hikes, bike rides, doing outdoor art, painting rocks. So it was just, my main focus was like, all the kids are going to be okay education-wise. Like, freaking out like that they're not getting, the full curriculum this year. I was like, there are bigger things to worry about. The kids are going to be okay. The kids are all right, isn't that song? But I was really concerned for the mental health of the kids. My daughter's very connected with my mother, and so am I. I see my mother every day, every other day. And not being able to hug my mother for 8 weeks, that really affected both my mother, my daughter, myself, not being able to see my nieces and nephews. So, the last thing I wanted to do was to start being like, oh, you need to do mathematics. And, while she's trying to do this, and the curriculum was rushed. So to be honest, I feel like I'm one of many parents. Like, there's a lot of parents in this community that, went to try and get their kids to do the online learning and then very quickly realized, no, like this isn't going to work for the children, and it was just so sudden. Like, we ripped the rug out from underneath them, and then, here, go online and start learning this. And it's like, I think it was a lot for children. And, it's been good in the sense that at home, when I have to do work or hop on Zoom meetings and things, my daughter and I have been able to communicate that, and like, mom needs time to do some work. You can read a book, or, you can play a video game or you can play outside. So
Use the new swing set.
yeah, I'm lucky that I'm like Olive is able to understand and respect space for me.
Mhm.
Like, I have to do this. And she's like, okay. And then we'll make a plan to go for a bike ride later or something. So it has been tricky, but it's been good in the sense that we are doing a lot of talking and checking in about our feelings and, you know, are you feeling anxious, stuff like that. But for me, the schooling in my house, it was like, you know what, we're just going to do some intuitive learning, you know, like, let's go out and do math with chalk, but not be like, okay, it's time to learn about math.
Right.
So let's read a book, but here's how you're getting in these reading skills. So I felt in the chaos of everything, having it less structured worked in my home.
Well, that's excellent. You know, and you've touched on such an important topic throughout this pandemic for all of us, and that is, you know, protecting our mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And online learning can be very difficult for kids. I understand you've come up with a plan, Jenna, and something that you and the other parents have done, a creative way to support kids while they learn online. Can you share what you've been doing with us?
Yeah. So my daughter is incredibly social, but I absolutely felt not good about sending her back. You know, to touch on previous comments, Lord Roberts is an old school that doesn't have ventilation. And, you know, it's funny with the town hall meeting of last week, someone asked, why aren't we having other facilities to spread children out? And one of the superintendent's responses was, oh, well, we worry about their HVAC system. To which made me laugh, because it's like, Lord Roberts is like a hot box in the summer. Like, the upper floor, there is no proper ventilation. As far as I know, nothing has changed. So we're just sending them right back into it. So that felt like a bit of a cop-out. But I just couldn't feel comfortable. And I talked to other parents about what they were doing. And 4 girls, including my daughter, they've all been in the same classes. They love each other. They play. And so we started talking to the parents about pod learning, where we would create a pod for them where they would be able to socialize, you know, without masks, and play and do group work. So each parent is taking a different day of the week to host that schooling. So we'll get up and do we'll do our school routine, get up, eat breakfast, get dressed, and take them out as if it's school time, but it's at a different parent's house. And, you know, we're collaborating on homework, expectations, you know, snacks, little field trips, you know, because I think a really big thing was they need to socialize. And having them in isolation, you know, if I could avoid putting her in school, but also isolating her in her learning, like, I was willing to look for anything, because I think that is a huge aspect that our children need, if we can, is have it that way. And I spoke with her teacher from last year, and her teacher thought it was amazing, but because her concern is like, we are going to be so focused on policing hygiene that teachers don't feel like they're going to be able to give a great learning experience. So that was another factor.
Definitely. Well, you know, we know kids learn with one another and from one another. And, you know, I've heard talk of online learning, sometimes referred to as 21st century learning. And we know that's not necessarily the case. When 21st century learning includes the ability to collaborate, to cooperate, to problem solve with one another. Those are some of the skills that employers are looking for.
That's what they need to learn.
Yeah. Well, I hope the parents are taking notes with what you've been doing, Jenna, because I know quite a number of folks are simply wanting to withdraw their children from classes, thinking that's going to alleviate the classroom burdens. But unfortunately, that's not the case. it's also disappointing to see that we haven't had the government come up with solutions such as these. I think it's brilliant that you found a way to socialize, achieve educational goals, but also helping your child be the best person that they are and protecting their mental health by, keeping them in touch with their good friends.
It also helps the parents in the fact that, we're on deck for one day of learning, but then, drop the kid off, go to school, then go home and do work or go to your job or something. And some of the parents that work full time and can't, they're accommodating by they're in charge of all the snacks for the week. So we've kind of like redistributed the labor and the finances so that no one parent is burdened with and has the ability to go and do what they need to do to care for their family.
Oh, that's excellent. It's we see young people collaborating and we see their parents collaborating. Great. Chris, my next question is for you. And I just wanted to know, what were some of the challenges? I mean, 4 kids, that's a busy household. So what were some of the challenges that you folks found with online learning and some of the things your family went through?
Thanks, Terence. One of the things I think was challenging is posting times for online learning, because the student may be alert and available early in the morning, but the assignment may get delayed in terms of posting, and so they're ready to engage in something, but there's nothing there for them to engage in, and when it gets posted, they may have other things that they need to attend to at that time, or it may not be the optimal time for them. So despite best efforts of educators to make sure that things were there were technical glitches, and there were human errors that resulted in stuff not being available. So I think that's one piece, right? That you don't miss it when you're in person. The lesson is happening now. The sheets are being passed out now. But when you fail to click a button, something may not actually pass over to that student that is existing many kilometers away from you, right? Another piece that I think is challenging and will continue to be challenging is the potential for miscommunication or misunderstanding in online learning. So the relationship building is a big part of what we're doing, and I think Jenna was getting at that as well when she's talking about mental health. Children need to build a strong relationship with those educators, especially children who haven't had a lot of school experience and then suddenly got into the health emergency where, they're being put back into a school setting and learning to trust in a new adult. And when that's happening online, there's potential that we don't, the child may not really be understood by the educator, and the educator may not be really understood by the child. So, in our case, there was an assignment that was handed in and to the best of my child's ability, and then a comment came back about academic dishonesty, and he felt crushed about it, and certainly it would have been something that would likely have been dealt with in a kind of a personal conversation, like, hey, I see you've been including some quotes in the work here. That's great. I want to see more of your analysis, right? It would be a simple fix if it was a kind of a one-to-one conversation. But a short message, as from texting other people, you can get misunderstood. What you intended is not what gets received at the other end. So I think those are, potential landmines that students who are working remotely might kind of bump into.
Most definitely. I was thinking of that very same thing with texting, and, might have a little bit of sarcasm that might go the wrong way when you don't have that human being in front of you.
Right.
And also, you spoke towards about the process. When someone is learning, we can help them learn in the right direction or practice perfectly if there's that opportunity to intervene before an assignment is complete. Whereas once it is done, it becomes much more difficult to go back and correct the work. So yeah. I also wanted to ask, are you concerned about your children being able to socially distance while at school, whether at lunch or in the halls or anywhere else?
I may be foolish to say this, but I think ours understand what's going to be required when they go out, right? I think they do. We've allow them to have some social interactions, and we've observed them here with their friends. They tend to do a pretty good job of it. However, putting a whole bunch in one space with no parent in sight and one educator whose job it is to try to corral that whole situation, is a different matter. So I am concerned that this whole plan hinges on the degree to which we as the parents or guardians have conditioned our kids to go back into school playing by the rules. And they certainly have heard those rules a lot. Wash your hands, watch your distance, right? All those pieces are still there, and the wear a mask now becoming, the standard. All of those are good, right? But as Sarah was saying, the inclination to go and wrap your arms around a friend, loving reunion, or to, tackle somebody because they took your ball will still be there. And it's going to be quite challenging, I think, to successfully implement a whole bunch of conditions that are being set up and, dutifully to try to protect adults and kids. But behavior is going to be a big piece with all these bodies attending at the same time.
Well, absolutely. Kids are just little people, and we know that expecting them to follow the rules 100% of the time, we know many adults couldn't possibly make that standard.
Yeah.
Still frequently, you run into a friend or something, and your first inclination is to want to reach out and shake hands, but we know that adults can catch themselves. It's going to be more problematic for children to be able to monitor their normal human inclinations. It is very tricky.
Yeah, and I think we will find that children will take that feedback and will modify their behavior, but trying to do it with all the other things just ramping up at exactly the same time, maybe asking a bit much, right? I think they'll handle this is how we eat, this is what we do when we finish eating, this is how we'll come in from school. I think they'll handle those pieces, but with all the bodies there all at the same time, that physical distance piece is a challenge that I worry about.
Absolutely. It's going to be a very big change for a lot of students.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, Jenna, and Chris, for shedding some light and sharing your concerns. I wanted to open up the floor now to some more general questions, and so anyone feel free to jump in wherever you would like. My first question is, do you believe that the government should increase funding so that our kids can be safe?
I mean, absolutely. I feel, after watching sort of the town hall meeting, I had a couple feelings. I'm like, it feels like the school board is working really hard to, placate parents. It's all right, it's going to be okay. And, we're smart enough to have taught our children from home and stuff like this. But then at the same time, it's sort of feeding us information that, for myself, is like, are you trying to pull the wool over my eyes with some of these answers? And, I felt like if you're not going to reduce class sizes or find other facilities, if it's a matter of not having money to do that, then say so. But saying that, oh, we're following the London Health Unit's guide and blah, blah, blah. And we're like, well, there's been a little bit of issue with the health unit not even wanting to do mass. And that had to be overrun by the city. So, just tell us, if you don't have the funds and that is what you would like to do, then maybe tell the parents and be honest and be like, we don't have the ability to do this. We would love to have facilities where the children, we can make, areas where kids can socially distance. We would love to have put together a pod system where parents can sign up to pod their children together for learning. We haven't been on the ball, as Sarah said. This has been, in the making for months now. And as a parent teaching remotely, we have the bare minimum information. Like we have nothing. So, you know, it just feels like either the school board is, you know, trying to hide incompetence, or they are just not telling us, like, we're not getting the money. Then it's like, okay, let us know so the parents can be like, give our school boards money, you know? It just feels like they're trying to pull the wool over our eyes in this situation. And I don't know. I find that it, like, a lot of the answers like paint the school board as incompetent, which I don't think necessarily is a thing, but it just feels a lot of like cop-out conversations. Like, the schools need money. Why aren't they getting money for that?
You know, I think, you know, we saw the director go into Eagle Heights, and they had prepared that school for 3 different eventualities. And I feel very badly for school boards that have been really scrambling with a lack of leadership from the ministry, not knowing what exactly the plan was, and then to have the plan sort of foisted upon them. And, you know, it's put everyone, I think, really in a very precarious situation. What about you, Sarah?
Yeah, I was going to ask if I could jump in and just offer a little bit of insight, I guess you'd call it. But in terms of that, the school boards are playing catch up every single time the government changes things, and that's happening daily. And I mean, to the point where we don't know what's going on. Teachers don't know, the schools don't know, the boards don't know. Like, we're literally being handed new directives daily and then having to fix everything. The school that I'm working at this semester, the principal had to redo the timetable 3 times. Classes got collapsed. Teachers were told, you know, you're displaced. And I didn't know for a couple of days whether or not I was working at all, because all of a sudden the plan that had been put in place was now no longer the plan, because, you know, X, Y, and Z number of students opted to learn remotely. So now the funding is cut, because the funding is per student, right? So all of a sudden, instead of allowing those class sizes to remain small by virtue of, I guess, attrition, the government decided that they were only going to fund the kids that are actually in the building. Never mind the fact that these kids are still learning. They're still part of the school system. They're just not physically present in the building, but that didn't seem to matter. So I've got friends that are early childhood educators that are, you know, that teach kindergarten and JK and are seeing their classes balloon to 27, 30 kids, because all of a sudden 5 classes have been collapsed, and now they're just smushing all these kids together. And like, that's horrifying. I find that really, really horrifying. And it's legitimately not the boards doing this. This is the government saying, oh yeah, okay, so now we've got, because they set the deadline to opt out as August 18th. A number of parents did that, and then they set another deadline, which was August 28th, and then that changed the amount of kids again. So all of a sudden, oh, we're going to displace 6 teachers, and now there's 6 empty classrooms, and these classrooms are empty. They got no one. So
I think I just wanted to hear some honesty, because I don't think that the board is incompetent, but it comes off as that way. You know, let us know that, like, being honest and not tiptoeing around like politics and stuff. Be like, you know what? Yeah, our class sizes are going to be massive. We're going to have empty rooms. We're not being given the teacher funding. You know, let us know who we have to go get angry at, is what I want to know the truth. And I just felt like during that town hall meeting, you could just see the ways that sidestepping was happening. You know, somebody asked, what are you going to do? Like, what is your plan for overcrowding, like huge classes? And one woman was like, basically, she's like, we don't have a plan for that. And I thought that was really honest, but then she was overridden by like the superintendent being like, well, actually, we're just following the guidelines of the London Health Unit. I'm like, no, you're not. Like, you put 28 kids in a classroom and you think they're going to be able to socially distance 2 meters away from each other? Like, don't tell me that. That's not an acceptable real answer. Like, say, we don't have a backup plan because we're not getting the funding, and if you would like to help us, write X, blah, 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 you know.
Yeah. Well, here we have a situation where I know a lot of school boards approached the Ministry of Ed asking whether they could run smaller classes, and that request was summarily denied. What about you, Chris?
Well, both of Jenna and Sarah have gotten me thinking about social circles, right? I was listening to the Toronto Medical Officer of Health and the Provincial Medical Officer of Health, and I was looking at the City of London Medical Officer of Health at the website for Middlesex London Health Unit, and all of them, within the last week, have referred to the social circle being exclusive and being 10 people, and those 10 people would have to maintain only one social circle, and that they wouldn't necessarily have to physically distance, but they can't have more than one, and the people in that circle couldn't change day to day. Within about a week's time, you're going to have 28 people in a classroom that will have a great difficulty maintaining social distance. We went from 2 meters to 1 meter arbitrarily, only because we can recognize that the rooms that we're putting people in wouldn't physically allow for it. You could potentially do it if you stayed still at 1 meter, but who stays still in a classroom, right? So we have to recognize that there's, it's ludicrous to think about, but we are going to be jumping from a social circle of 10 to, in reality, more like one of 28 people. And no policy change, just that is what's going to happen. So certainly I think this would be a time where you would say, let's try to fund something that would allow for half the kids to attend. That would allow for other teachers to be brought into the mix so that we could separate kids out. And I know with young people, if they're not in school full time, their parents aren't able to work full time. Like, that's got to be a prime consideration that the government was trying to operate on. Whereas for secondary students, we could have those kids go part-time and go home, and it doesn't impact mom and dad going to work. So that's an easy policy choice, but it's a hard policy choice to say, let's go half-time in elementary, because those kids need care, right? The 7-year-old daughter that we're talking about needs to be cared for, can't go home by themselves. But we can do that. We can do that responsible choice in secondary, but it's hard to do that really responsible choice in elementary and still get parents out in the workforce.
Oh, absolutely. And one thing that is also sort of missing from this conversation, I think we take a look at all the kids who struggled with online learning throughout the spring, and the government has a real opportunity here to help all of those kids get an additional leg up. With classes of 15, the educational outcomes will be far better. We know there's so many kids who are, not at the top of the class and not at the bottom of the class, and they just simply almost float through school. And this, with classes of 15, would give that extra attention, give them that little bit of an extra push to achieve amazing results. But my last question before we wrap things up for the evening, I wanted to hear from you, and the number one thing that the government needs to do to create a safe September.
Class sizes. It all boils down, in my opinion, to that. And I think, if money is the excuse, it's a pretty poor one, because I honestly believe that if money is the reason, if money is the thing that's holding back our children getting appropriately sized classes and an education that's not going to endanger their health, then that shows that we have built a system that is a house of cards, and it's going to fall down. Because if we're treating elementary school, as you mentioned, parents got to work, and teachers we're not babysitters, but we recognize that we provide a function in society, in that putting children in school during the day allows that economy and that business to function, and that's reciprocal. That's great. But if money is the thing that's hinging on all of this not working anymore, then we need to relook at things like universal basic income, at things that would allow parents to stay home when they need to, so that we're not looking at schools as inevitable things that, you need to put your kid in this building, or you can't feed your kid. Like, that's the decision it's coming down to. And that's a scary one. So I think that class sizes need to be the priority, and the money needs to be found. I'm sure Doug can find his efficiencies somewhere.
I was looking over the sick kids statement that was issued right after the announcement that, you know, we're going back to school. Everybody's going to be there on September 8th, like it's on. And I read the sick kids statement, and it talked about a bundle of measures that pediatricians and infectious disease specialists were recommending. And that bundle included hand hygiene, cleaning, physical distancing, class sizes, cohorting, masking for older students when distancing is not possible, and what you mentioned earlier, improved ventilation in classrooms. So we've taken a subset of that bundle. We focused almost exclusively on cleaning measures and personal protective equipment, and a little bit of masking, but not a policy with teeth. So that's kind of where we're at right now, and we're crossing our fingers and being hopeful that behavior overrides the fact that we could not or would not put in place the full bundle of measures that was recommended in that report. It was cited in the announcement, but not the spirit of the announcement, just pieces of that announcement by Sick Kids, right? That really, it was a whole bunch of things that they said, we need to get kids back in school. We know school's good for children, really good for children. And I totally agree with that. But these were a whole basket of protective measures that were being put forward. And we're kind of, sort of putting those protective measures in place.
Most definitely.
I think it's interesting that the protective measures that are being put in place are the ones that put the responsibility on the parents and children. But the protective measures that require the government to put in money to create those aren't happening. Like, you know, the proper ventilation and, you know, smaller class sizes. It's like, you want us to do our part by educating our children about masking, hygiene, social distancing. You want us to create pods. You want us to do remote learning if we can. And it's like, all of these things that have been implemented are the responsibilities of the parents and the children. And it's like, okay, we're doing our part, but where is your part where you actually have to put in that? So it's like, you know, it feels very classic of the government to be like, this is how we're going to do it. But like, you do your part and we hope that it works. And if it doesn't work, then maybe we'll do, like, when the schools shut down and hope, like, reopen next year, maybe they'll have ventilation and maybe they'll have smaller class sizes. It's like, oops, like, I guess we should have done that. It's like, we've done our part. Come on.
Jonah, it's interesting that you say that, because a lot of these measures, as Chris mentioned too, are hinging on parents being the ones that, like, for example, asking parents to sign a declaration daily that their child is not exhibiting symptoms, not having anybody at the school actually screening, which, you know, obviously teachers can't do, administrators are too busy, but, you know, again, we're not getting any sort of funding for, you know, there's one public health nurse per 10 schools. I mean, that's ridiculous. You know, if you've got a kid that's being isolated at school A and that nurse is over at school B, like, you're not going to have, you know, those measures are hinging. And if the parent has to go to work and their kid has the sniffles and they think, oh, it's just seasonal allergies, or, oh, you know, it's probably just a cold, I can't miss a day of work because I don't have sick days, you know, like, that's going to be what they're going to do. They're going to drop their child off and hope that it's not COVID.
And that's how it's always been.
Yeah.
Oh, you're sneezing a bit, hope it's not the flu, you know, and then it takes out an entire class.
Well, that's right. You know, and that's something that is missing from this equation. I mean, we know that if there is an outbreak within a school, or a suspected outbreak, or someone is suspected of having COVID, they need to isolate. And what are parents going to do who don't have paid sick days? You know, I think you've all touched on some really important things. I think the most fundamental thing is that of class size. As Chris has mentioned, Sick Kids recommendation was smaller class sizes. The RNAO has also put forward a letter saying we need smaller class sizes immediately, and there's no evidence to justify classrooms that only have 1 meter of physical distancing. It's interesting to see that 2 meters has suddenly become 1 meter, because we know schools can't accommodate unless they have smaller class sizes. Well, you know, this has been such a great conversation, and unfortunately we are running out of time. So I just wanted to thank you, all three of you, for sharing your stories with other Londoners. This back to school choice is very personal. And I've heard from so many folks who are going through the exact same thing. It's unfortunate to know that there are a lot of parents who think that by keeping their kids at home, they're going to be helping this class sizes within the school. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. You know, parents should not feel alone in this choice. I hope that they know that that they're doing their best and they're doing what's right for them as well as their kids. It's unfair for the government to put parents in this position. As you rightly mentioned, you're being expected to do more and more and more while the government is doing less and not finding the funding that is necessary. Instead of making school safe, they're waiting around to see if school is going to be safe. You know, we crossing their fingers and hoping for the best. It doesn't seem to be enough for me. The official opposition has tabled a motion in the legislature, including steps like hiring more educators to allow for those smaller class sizes, funding for extra school buses, additional clean janitorial staff, additional supports for students with special needs, and school upgrades that are so vitally needed to help with things like infection control. This isn't something that I'm going to give up on. I'm going to keep raising my voice for a safe September, and I hope that everyone continues doing the same. Keep sending those emails, leave those voicemails, and let the government know how important it is that we have safe schools. Our kids are worth it. So I want to thank Sarah, Jenna, and Chris for your time this evening. I sincerely hope the government listens to your thoughtful and caring comments. I want to thank everyone who's joined us online, and I hope you all have a great night. Bye for now.